Hey everyone, welcome to Chasing Art. I hope the holidays treated everyone well and it's good to be back. We're going to hop right into this one because I thought it'd be interesting to show you all how I do my portraits. And since I just did 7 of them for Christmas, I already had the footage for it, so let's get into it. My reference photo is going to be of this handsome young lad, and yes, he's my grandson. This will be the 6th annual drawing I've done of him, and looking back through them all, I can definitely see my progression. But getting back to the drawing here, obviously I've already got my image transferred, and I'm going to start with the eyes. I'm going to start with a 4H lead and a blending stump. The blending stump works great for the gradients found in the face. And the reason for the 4H is because it's a very light grade graphite, so that way I can get everything mapped in very lightly to begin with, and then I'll come back in with my HB, I'll come back in with my 2B, I think I even brought a 4B into this one. You'll notice that as I'm working, I'm constantly bouncing back and forth between the blending stump and the pencil, and that's because I want to make sure that I'm where I want to be with the values. Using a blending stump always seems to change the values that were put down with the pencil. And for good reason too, because what you're doing is essentially you're just moving the graphite around on the paper. You're not normally adding to it unless you have residual graphite from a previous drawing or previous usage. At this stage, I'm not trying to draw in the eyebrows. Basically what I'm doing is I'm just drawing in a shadow of where they're going to be. But I do believe that they stay pretty much in this state throughout the rest of the drawing until it gets towards the end. And then at that point I come back in and I add in a couple random hairs just to help enhance the image a little bit. And that's enough for the eyes right now. Let's move on to the nose. And if you look close, you'll notice that the nostrils themselves are about the only spot where there's an actual hard line. The outside of the nostril is a little prominent, but it's not a hard line. So what I'll do is I'll put a line down, then I'll come in with my blending stump and smooth it out so it's not quite as prominent. I found that doing it this way helps the realism of it because at least in child portraits, there's not many hard edges in their faces. So by taking as many of those out as I can, it's really helped boost the realism, but yet still helps maintain the artistic look that I'm looking for. I think it works. And if you take a look at this drawing from a few years back, you'll notice there's a lot of outlines to it. And I guess that's what I'm referring to as far as hard lines. You'll notice like on the bridge of the nose, I have an outline on that. Around the nostril, pretty much around the whole entire drawing, there's an outline. And that's what I'm trying to get away from. I think it just gives the drawing a more natural and soft appearance. And since I keep mentioning blending stumps, let's talk about them for a second. Just in case you don't know what they are. What they are pretty much is they're just a compressed paper cellulose with a point on either end, used for shading. Not to be confused with tortillons, which are rolled up paper with a point on the end. They're two different things. You'll see I have a tortillon next to my drawing here, but you probably won't see me grab it. I thought maybe I'd use it, but honestly I don't use those nearly as much as I use the stumps. Anyway, let's move on to the mouth. This is another spot that's going to have a couple hard lines in it, but maybe not nearly as many as what you think. See, the upper part of the upper lip, there's a slight transition there, so that's going to be blurred a little bit. And the lower part of the lower lip, that's going to be the same thing. And when I say blur, what I'm talking about is when I will take my blending stump and I'll run along the length of the line and it'll kind of smooth it out. It'll take some of that harsh edge away and just give it a more natural looking transition. And then if it still seems a little bit too harsh, I might take my kneaded eraser and just kind of dab at it a little bit. Usually that will pick up more graphite and also give it just a little bit of texture. You've probably noticed by now that as I work on key features like the eyes, nose, and mouth, I'll also work on the facial shading in the surrounding areas. It's also something that seems to help me out a lot with my values. And I think that's the second time I've brought up values without actually explaining what they are. A value refers to the lightness or darkness of a color. And I know we're just doing this in black and white, obviously since it's a graphite drawing, but there is a whole range of varying shades that we can work with. And figuring out where those various shades should go is honestly probably half the battle. But if you have a good reference photo and you squint just right, a lot of times both the shadows and the values of those shadows will become a little bit more apparent. So that's why I do this, so I can compare values as I go along and don't get ones that are pretty similar, too far out of whack. I hope that makes sense, but if you have any more questions about it, just leave a comment and I'll do what I can to explain it a little bit better. But for now, let's move on to the ears. I really enjoy doing the ears because there's just so much going on in there. There's a lot of folds, there's a lot of light play, there's a lot of shape. Everybody's ears are shaped different. They're kind of like fingerprints, I think. I think I heard that one time. And I probably heard it somewhere on the internet, so you know it's true. But I approach these in the same way I do everything else in the drawing. I start with my lightest grade of lead, or hardest, however you'd like to look at it, and sneak up on the values by layering it until it's close to where I'd like it to be. And speaking of liking something, if you've made it this far into the video, I'd like to say thank you, and if you've enjoyed it so far, please hit the subscribe button. And since I really haven't nailed this video editing thing down yet, I've been a bit random with when my videos come out, so you may want to hit the notification bell too, just so you don't miss anything. Now right here you notice that on the right side of his lower mouth I pushed the values way too dark, and I seen that right away, so what I did is I increased the value on the shaded side, then came back with my kneaded eraser and knocked the light side down until I felt it was a good balance. These erasers work great in spots like this because a standard eraser would have been much harder to get that result with. Hey everyone, video editor Mike here. Just thought I'd tell you about the time that I actually made a pencil. I had 2 erasers on it, but in the end it ended up being pointless. Now that most of the center section is mapped in, I'm going to start working on increasing the values in some areas. Some adjustments are more subtle and some are more drastic, like you'll see in the ear. But what this is going to do is it's going to start giving the drawing more shape and depth by pushing the dark areas even darker. I have to be honest here. When it comes time to draw this kid's hair in, every year I complain about it the whole time I'm working on it. This year wasn't no exception. With all the curls and the messy bedhead going on, his hair is just the bane of my existence. But this is something I can control since I'm the one that makes the decision on what picture I'm going to base my drawing on. You see, what I do is I just keep an eye on social media and save pictures through the year that my daughter posts. So by the end of the year, I have a decent bunch to go through and I find the one that I like the best. That way she has no idea what's coming, and I find it more fun that way, and it's more of a surprise for her. But what I'm doing here is, I'm not drawing in every hair. I am drawing in a lot of the darker shapes, but I did draw in a lot of the individual hairs as well, which was probably overkill, but I find that it does help establish the direction that everything's flowing. Which is like everywhere on this little guy's head. Now that the initial layer of hair is done, I'm going to start working on the shading in the forehead. And I'll kind of bounce back and forth between the hair and the forehead as I work through this. It is kind of a lengthy affair going through this stage, but please understand that even though I did cut a lot of this process out while editing, I did need to leave a decent amount to show the procedure that I used. If you haven't noticed yet, there's very few spots on this drawing that haven't been touched by the blending stump. And I do that intentionally just to kind of knock the white back. But also the spots that I have not hit with the blending stump will be obviously the brightest whites, because you can't get any whiter than what the sheet of paper already is. So I leave those areas alone, and those will be my highlights. But I mean, as long as you have a light touch while you're doing this, even if you cover up a highlight area, you can still come back and erase it most of the time. That's the beauty of doing this with graphite, is graphite is very easy to work with. Normally you can come back in and you can probably get 90+% of the graphite lifted back up, if not more. It's a medium that's very forgiving for beginners. And honestly, by learning these things such as value, contrast, shading, while you're in your pencil/drawing stage, if you decide to branch out to other mediums like ink, watercolor, oils, acrylics, anything really, it's just going to make learning these a little easier, because you'll already be familiar with not only the terms, but the practices of them. Like I said before, I started out airbrushing, and I hadn't touched a pencil in years. I drew quite a bit when I was a kid, but it'd been a long time since I touched a pencil. But once I started airbrushing, I shortly thereafter started going back and learning how to draw, working on shading, and everything that comes with it. I'll be honest, it was the one thing that improved my airbrushing over anything else, was learning these basics. Now, moving down into his clothes, I generally don't try to put a super amount of detail in. I don't try to make sure everything's blended well. I kind of like a rougher look when it comes to that. I mean, it's mainly a portrait. I think of the face when it comes to the portrait, but I like to add a little bit around it also. So I usually throw in some clothes. It usually goes down to, say, the shoulder or so. And I try to get some detail. I try to capture the folds and whatnot and how the light's playing off of it. But I don't make it as smooth as the rest of it, if that makes sense. And with that done, we're finally into the home stretch. I'm going to go through and I'm going to touch some things up. I'm going to just try to help bring it all together. I'm going to try to make sure that my darks are as dark as I'd like them to be, that my eyes are balanced, all my shading is as smooth and consistent as I can make it. Pretty much I'm just looking to go over everything and just try to make it one cohesive piece. It's been a long trip to this point, so let's just make sure we can get it as good as we possibly can. And finally, to finish it off, and probably the main reason why I like to use watercolor paper for this, is because I like to come in and just throw in some splashes of color. I'll vary it a little bit just to give it a little bit more interest, but it's usually one solid color. And like you see, I'm just kind of dabbing to give it some darker areas, and I think it finishes it off nice. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Hey everyone, I just wanted to hop on here while the video winds down and thank everybody that stuck around until the end. Really appreciate it. I know it's been a few minutes, maybe a month since I put out my last video, but hopefully now that the holidays have passed, we can just hop into some sort of rhythm here. Anyway, I'll catch you next time. You take care.